You think you know yourself. You believe the stories you tell about who you are, why you do things, what you want. But Socrates, the wisest man in ancient Greece, discovered something that will shatter every comfortable lie you've built your life on. What if the person you're most dishonest with isn't your friend, your boss, or your partner? What if it's yourself? Socrates didn't just question others, he exposed the most dangerous kind of deception. The lies we tell ourselves so convincingly that we forget they're lies. Not malicious lies, survival lies. The kind that keep us comfortable, safe, and completely unconscious. This isn't about becoming harsh with yourself. It's about becoming honest, because once you see what Socrates saw, you'll realize something shocking. Most of your problems aren't caused by other people, bad luck, or circumstances. They're caused by the stories you've been telling yourself to avoid facing reality. And the terrifying part, you don't even know you're doing it. This video reveals Socrates' complete method for breaking through self-deception. 3 powerful parts, each building on the last. If you skip ahead, you'll miss the precision that makes this truly transformative. So stay with me, because by the end, you won't just understand how you lie to yourself, you'll understand how to stop. Part 1. The architecture of self-deception. You've been trained from birth to lie to yourself. Not intentionally, but systematically. Every time a truth was too painful, you learned to create a softer version. A more manageable story, a prettier lie. Socrates called this the unexamined life. And he said it wasn't worth living. Not because he wanted to be cruel, but because he understood something most people never realize. The lies you tell yourself don't protect you. They imprison you. Here's what no one tells you about self-deception. It's not a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism. Your brain is literally designed to protect you from threatening information that challenges your sense of self, your security, your worldview. When you were 5 and your parents fought, you told yourself it was your fault, because that felt safer than admitting your world was unstable. When you were 10 and got rejected by friends, you told yourself you didn't want to be part of their group anyway, because that felt better than facing rejection. When you were 15 and failed at something important, you told yourself you didn't really try, because that protected your self-image from genuine failure. These weren't conscious choices, they were unconscious adaptations. But Socrates discovered that this protection comes with a price. The more you avoid difficult truths, the more disconnected you become from reality. And the more disconnected you become from reality, the more powerless you become to change anything. Socrates spent his life in the Agora of Athens, questioning people who believed they knew things they didn't know. When Socrates questioned a general about courage, the general gave confident answers. But through careful questioning, Socrates revealed something. The general had never really examined what courage meant. He was operating on assumptions and social conditioning that he'd never questioned. The same thing happens to you every day. You make decisions based on beliefs you've never examined. You react to situations based on stories you've never questioned. You live your life according to rules you've never consciously chosen. Socrates developed a method for breaking through this unconscious dishonesty. Not through criticism, not through judgment, but through questions. The right questions asked in the right way can dissolve years of self-deception in minutes. And the first question Socrates would ask you is this: what do you know for certain about yourself? Not what you believe, not what you hope, not what others have told you. What do you actually know? Most people can't answer this question honestly, because they've never separated what they know from what they've convinced themselves is true. They say things like, I know I'm a good person, when what they mean is, I want to be a good person. But Socrates would push deeper. How do you know you're good? What evidence do you have? What actions demonstrate goodness? This isn't meant to make you feel bad. It's meant to make you precise, because precision is power. The more accurately you see yourself, the more effectively you can change yourself. Socrates discovered the first pattern of self-deception. Once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere in your life. We confuse our intentions with our actions. You tell yourself you're a hard worker because you intend to work hard. But Socrates would ask, what work have you actually completed? You tell yourself you're a loving partner because you feel love. But Socrates would ask, what loving actions have you taken today? The gap between intention and action is where most self-deception lives. We give ourselves credit for what we plan to do, what we want to do, what we think about doing. But reality only counts what we actually do. This is why people can feel like they're working hard while getting nothing done. Why they can feel like they're being kind while others experience them as self. Why they can feel like they're making progress while staying exactly where they are. Socrates understood that recognizing this gap isn't about self-punishment, it's about liberation. When you stop confusing intention with action, you can start measuring yourself by reality instead of comfortable stories. And when you measure yourself by reality, you can start changing reality. But there's a second pattern that goes even deeper, and this one is going to make you uncomfortable. If you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever wondered why your life isn't changing despite your efforts, the answer might be simpler and more uncomfortable than you think. You might be lying to yourself about something fundamental. Part 2. The hidden motivations you won't admit. The second pattern Socrates identified is operating in your life right now. We confuse our reasons with our excuses. Every behavior has a reason, but most of the reasons we give ourselves aren't the real reasons. They're the acceptable reasons, the reasons that let us maintain our self-image. Socrates would ask, why do you really do that? Not the first answer, not the obvious answer, the real answer that you don't want to admit. You tell yourself you don't exercise because you're too busy. Socrates would ask, are you too busy? Or do you not want to feel uncomfortable? You tell yourself you don't pursue that opportunity because you're not ready. Socrates would ask, are you not ready? Or are you afraid of failing? You tell yourself you stay in that job because it's practical. Socrates would ask, is it practical? Or are you afraid of change? The difference between reasons and excuses is the difference between power and victimhood. When you identify your real reasons, you can address them. When you hide behind acceptable excuses, you stay stuck. But this goes deeper than just explaining your behavior. Socrates discovered that we lie to ourselves about our deepest motivations. The things that actually drive us aren't the noble things we claim. They're often fear, ego, comfort, and control disguised as virtue. You tell yourself you're being helpful, but you're actually trying to be needed. You tell yourself you're being careful, but you're actually being cowardly. You tell yourself you're being practical, but you're actually being lazy. You tell yourself you're being humble, but you're actually avoiding responsibility. Socrates encountered this constantly in Athens. Politicians who claimed to serve the public good, but were really serving their own ambition. Teachers who claimed to love wisdom, but really loved being seen as wise. Citizens who claimed to value truth, but really valued comfort. And the most dangerous part, they believed their own stories. They had convinced themselves so thoroughly that their noble explanations were true, that they couldn't see their real motivations anymore. This is happening in your life right now. There are things you do that you explain to yourself in noble terms, but if you were honest, really honest, you'd admit that your real motivations are less flattering. Socrates develops specific questions to help people see through these comfortable lies. Questions like, if no one would ever know about this action, would you still do it? If this behavior got you no recognition, no reward, no approval, would you continue it? What would you do if you weren't afraid of what people would think? These questions reveal something most people desperately want to avoid. How much of our behavior is driven by image management rather than authentic values? But Socrates knew that recognizing this isn't cause for shame. It's cause for celebration, because when you stop lying to yourself about your motivations, you can start choosing motivations consciously, instead of being driven by unconscious needs. The third pattern Socrates discovered is what he called the knowledge of ignorance, and it's the most liberating lie you'll ever stop telling yourself. Most people think they know much more than they actually know. We mistake confidence for competence. We mistake opinions for facts. We mistake assumptions for understanding. Socrates would ask, "How do you know that?" And then, when you gave your answer, he'd ask, "How do you know that's true?" Most people can't get past 3 levels of questioning before they realize something shocking. They don't actually know what they thought they knew. They're operating on assumptions, hearsay, emotional reasoning, or social conditioning that they've never examined. Try this with yourself right now. Take any belief you hold strongly about politics, relationships, success, health, anything. Ask yourself, how do I know this is true? Then ask, how do I know that source is reliable? Then ask, what evidence would change my mind about this? If you can't answer these questions clearly, you don't know what you think you know, you believe it. But belief and knowledge aren't the same thing. Socrates discovered that admitting ignorance isn't weakness, it's the beginning of real knowledge. When you stop pretending to know things you don't know, you become free to learn what's actually true. This pattern shows up everywhere in modern life. People who have strong opinions about complex topics they've never studied. People who give advice about situations they've never experienced. People who make important decisions based on assumptions they've never tested. But it also shows up in more personal ways. You think you know why your relationship isn't working, but you've never really examined your own patterns. You think you know why you're not succeeding, but you've never honestly assessed your own behavior. You think you know what you want, but you've never questioned whether your wants come from you or from conditioning. Socrates would tell you that saying "I don't know" is often the most honest and intelligent thing you can say, because when you admit you don't know something, you can start learning it. When you pretend you already know, learning stops. But there's one more pattern of self-deception that Socrates identified, and it's the most dangerous one, because it's the lie that keeps all the other lies in place. Want to go deeper? If this is hitting you, if you're starting to see your own patterns of self-deception, then you're ready for the final part. Because Socrates didn't just show us how to recognize lies, he showed us how to live in truth. Part 3. The questions you're afraid to ask. The fourth pattern of self-deception is the most dangerous. We avoid difficult questions because we're afraid of the answers. Deep down, part of you already knows the truths you're avoiding, but knowing and acknowledging aren't the same thing. Socrates would ask, what question are you most afraid to ask yourself? That question, whatever it is probably the most important one you could explore. The things we avoid thinking about are usually the things most worth thinking about. Maybe it's, am I actually happy in this relationship? Maybe it's, am I living the life I want, or the life I think I should want? Maybe it's, what would I do if I weren't afraid? Maybe it's, who am I when nobody is watching? These questions feel dangerous because the answers might require you to change something, and change is scary. It's easier to live in a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth that demands action. But Socrates discovered something profound about these avoided questions. The energy you spend not thinking about them is enormous. The mental effort required to keep certain thoughts out of your consciousness is exhausting. And the longer you avoid a difficult question, the more power it has over you. Think about this. There's probably something in your life right now that you know needs to change, but you don't let yourself fully acknowledge it. Every time the thought starts to form, you distract yourself. You busy yourself with work, entertainment, social media, anything to avoid sitting with that uncomfortable awareness. But that avoidance isn't protecting you, it's controlling you. Because when you won't consciously examine something, it examines you unconsciously. It influences your decisions, your mood, your energy, your relationships, all from the shadows of your mind. Socrates practiced what he called the art of questioning, not to attack people but to help them see through their own confusion. And the most powerful questions aren't the ones directed at others. They're the ones you ask yourself. Here's what Socrates discovered about difficult questions. They're only difficult before you ask them. Once you actually face them directly, honestly, without flinching, they lose their power to frighten you. The fear of the question is always worse than the question itself. But here's the deeper pattern Socrates identified. We avoid difficult questions, not just because we're afraid of the answers, but because we're afraid of what the answers might require us to do. It's not just the truth that scares us, it's the responsibility that comes with the truth. If you admit your relationship isn't working, you might have to have difficult conversations or make difficult decisions. If you admit you're not happy with your career, you might have to take risks or make sacrifices. If you admit you're not living authentically, you might have to disappoint people whose approval you've been seeking. Socrates understood that this is where most people stop. They see the lie, they feel bad about it, and then they go back to living it, because facing the truth feels too hard. But this, Socrates would say, is just another form of self-deception. It's the lie that you're protecting yourself when you're actually imprisoning yourself. The final pattern of self-deception Socrates identified is the deepest one. We lie to ourselves about our own agency. We tell ourselves we don't have choices when we do. We tell ourselves we're victims of circumstances when we're actually victims of our own decisions. We tell ourselves we can't change when what we mean is we don't want to face what change would require. Socrates would ask, what choices do you have right now that you're pretending you don't have? This question reveals something most people desperately want to avoid. You have more power than you're using, more options than you're seeing, more control than you're taking. The lie of powerlessness is seductive because it removes responsibility. If you can't change your situation, then you don't have to. If you don't have choices, then you don't have to make difficult decisions. If you're just a victim of circumstances, then you can wait for circumstances to change instead of changing yourself. But Socrates knew that this lie, more than any other, keeps people trapped in lives they don't want. Because when you believe you have no power, you use no power. And when you use no power, nothing changes. The truth Socrates discovered through decades of questioning is this: most of the limitations in your life aren't imposed by external circumstances. They're imposed by internal beliefs that you've never examined. You've convinced yourself that certain things are impossible when they're just difficult. You've convinced yourself that certain options don't exist when you just don't want to explore them. Here are the questions Socrates would want you to ask yourself right now. What am I pretending not to know? What am I avoiding because I'm afraid of what I might discover? What truth am I postponing because it would require me to change something? What choice am I pretending I don't have? These aren't comfortable questions. Socrates knew they wouldn't be. But he also knew that comfort and growth never coexist. You can have a comfortable life built on lies, or you can have a challenging life built on truth. But you can't have both. Socrates discovered that once you start living in truth, real truth, not the comfortable version, everything becomes clearer. Your priorities become obvious. Your decisions become easier. Your energy stops being wasted on maintaining pretense and starts being used for creating the life you actually want. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes real. And a real life, even a difficult one, is infinitely more satisfying than a fake life, even a pleasant one. Socrates spent his life proving that the examined life is not just worth living, but the only life worth living. He chose death rather than abandoning his commitment to truth, not because he was fanatical, but because he knew that a life built on lies isn't really a life at all. The final lesson Socrates taught is this: you can't love what you don't know, and you can't know yourself while you're lying to yourself. The lies you tell yourself to protect your self-image actually prevent you from developing a self-worth protect. When you stop lying to yourself, you might discover that you're not who you thought you were, but you might also discover that who you actually are is more interesting, more capable, and more valuable than the person you've been pretending to be. Now, take a moment and reflect. Every pattern we covered exists in your life somewhere. The gap between intentions and actions, the confusion of reasons with excuses, the pretense of knowledge you don't have, the avoidance of difficult questions, the lie of powerlessness. This isn't the end of self-deception, it's the beginning of self-awareness. Socrates didn't promise that seeing clearly would be easy. He promised that it would be worthwhile. So if you've felt seen by this video, if you've recognized patterns in yourself that you've never noticed before, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below which of these patterns hit you the hardest. Let's build something honest together in a world full of comfortable lies. And if this opened your eyes, subscribe. This is just the beginning of learning to see what's hidden, not just in others, but in yourself. Because the most important conversation you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And Socrates would say, make sure it's an honest one. You'll never lie to yourself the same way again. But more importantly, you'll never have to. And that's when real life begins. That's when you become who you were meant to be, instead of who you've been pretending to be.